Time for VUC. In our 11th year, with us on our journey this year, Simwood.com. Simwood can turn you as a developer into a telco. Greenfield Tech. Go to greenfield.tech and see how they can make your tech dreams both feasible and affordable. Our conference bridge is the best you'll ever find at zipdx.com. VUC.me is hosted on Bluehost. And our worldwide local rate dial-ins are provided by voxphone.com. And guess what? You're going to have the close-up from hell because I need to be close to the microphone to introduce this VUC. We got Randy Weinberger from Icehook, who is going to join us. I am going to be quiet, and it'll be a refreshing change for everybody. So, because I just can't get my audio working. So we're going to turn it over to Michael, and Michael is going to tell you a little bit more about what's happening. And take it away, Michael.
Well, the presumption is that I have a clue, which is not always the case, but here we go. So Randy reached out to us last week, and this is kind of a unusual turn of events, but you know, we normally engage people. In this case, he engaged us, and we said, "Well, Randy, we'd like to come find out about what you do," and so welcome, and thank you for the outreach. And wow. We had not been exposed to Icehook systems or root engine or any of this in the past, but we're going to start with our traditional question because we'd like to know as much about the people as about the technology and the companies and stuff. So maybe let's frame it up a little bit with who are Icehook systems, and then how did you come to be where you are in Icehook systems and all of this? Where are the roots of things?
Sure, thank you, and thanks for having me on. Like I said, I reached out because I'm a fan of the podcast and the streaming, and I just think it's you don't see this often, right? You guys really get down into the weeds, in a good way. So how Icehook came to be and how we came to this point. I think there's a lot in my background that sort of led me to become one of the co-founders. I started way back in 1996 at a company called IDT. I think many of you have heard that, in Hackensack, New Jersey. And my first role with them was selling dial-up internet access and long distance over the phone. I was more or less a telemarketer, and I was selling a little company called LDDS WorldCom, and you know, we were selling against AT&T, and they're 26 cents a minute. We were selling 13 cents, and it was actually really hard to get people to switch. And yeah, I jumped around a lot over there. I mean, the telemarketing wasn't really for me, and so I got put on this nascent calling card division. And this was back when calling cards were a businessman's tool, and you would sell them in airline magazines. And I think our days, you know, we were very excited when we hit $1,000 a day in sales. I think we got a pizza for the office. So that was early on, and you know, I was an entrepreneurial guy, and so I left IDT about a year later with some folks that started an international callback company called SACON. At least that's how we started. We ran, I don't know if any of you remember callback and how that worked, but essentially if you were in, let's say, Singapore and you wanted to call Malaysia, which was, you could see it from Singapore, it was something like $2 a minute. But if you were to run the calls out of the US and make a call to Malaysia and a call to Singapore and bridge them in the US, you can sell that for $1 a minute and make a lot of money doing so. And so we set out to do that, and eventually that morphed into building international routes into the developing world all over VSAT, using voice over frame technology, compressing it, 16 to 1 because we were going over a satellite link. And for me, I was a young guy. I was sort of, I'll do whatever. I mean, there was 4 of us in a room, and they said, okay, great, you're going to do whatever. You're going to run our switch, which I had absolutely no background in. It was a Windows NT based switch called VoiceWare, I think, and it did sort of everything. It was actually a pretty good platform. The only problem with it was it ran Windows NT, and to access it you had to go through PC Anywhere, and every time you accessed it on PC Anywhere it would crash. So we would crash 3-4 times a day. But we grew, and we eventually sold out to Titan Wireless. So we had a pretty good exit there. After that, I joined a company called General Telecom. And what General Telecom did was switch partitions. They had DMS switches, New York, Miami, LA, and they would just sell ports. And this suited me a lot better. I enjoyed the solution selling aspect of it. Eventually, I became general manager of the business. So I was responsible for, in the beginning, 3 data centers. It worked up to about 6 data centers. And all TDM infrastructure, and running a data center was just, everything would go wrong. It was like, they have this expression, you never notice a good referee in a game. If a referee is good, you never see him. That's how I felt about data centers. So people just expect them to work. And the only time you get noticed if you're a data center operator is when something breaks, and something was always breaking, whether it be the HVAC, whether it be the fire suppression system, the battery backups, everything needs to be tested. And running in places like New York City, it was all a lot of union rules. So it was really a difficult business. But because it was the late 90s, by the time I was there, it was the early aughts. We were growing. We were doing very well. We converted over to VoIP, and we started doing VoIP to TDM conversion over Cisco gateways and eventually some other types of gateways. And then we got into the hosted SBC business. So essentially, what we were doing with these big switches, we were doing with much smaller SBCs running on sort of just commercial hardware, non-specific hardware, so just server software. They were excellent in one way in that you could buy these things or you can lease this and set up, and you were a phone company, more or less. The problem was outside of the fact that the tech was really new and immature, was that the complex things you could do in a big TDM switch, you really couldn't do in an SBC. So things like handling routing to Mexico. You could route to country code 5.2, but Mexico had a bunch of different bands. It had about 10,000 codes. So you could never actually make Mexico work the way it worked. I mean, sometimes you would route to Mexico and it would be 1 cent a minute. Sometimes it would be 15 cents a minute. And you really had no control over that. So while we were at General Telecom, I hired a bunch of young software engineers, and I said, look, how do we solve this problem? We need to be able to solve this problem. It's just handling this routing at the edge with these devices aren't working. And we eventually came up to taking the routing outside of the SBC and building a completely separate routing database that would talk to the SBC over SIP. So you're just, instead of having everything in under one roof, you were separating out tasks, which when you think about the way the Linux world works, this is exactly what you do. You don't stuff everything into one process. You kind of have all these different sub-processes that all work well together. Well, that product worked really well. We sold a lot of it. We licensed it to GenBand, actually. They were selling it for a while, but we were still running into the same problems that we ran into in running our traditional business, which was buying hardware and maintaining that hardware, maintaining the data centers and the internet connections and BGP and the routers and all that sort of stuff. It's really expensive and just difficult when you didn't know, you didn't have a great handle on what growth was going to look like. So it was very difficult to plan. One day, I remember I was at the office and it was late, and one of my engineers said, "Hey, look at this. I want to show you something." And this is back in 2009. And they showed me some process, some software that was running on a server, and it was at 100% CPU. And they said, okay, now watch this. Flipped a couple keys, and all of a sudden brings up another box, and now each box is at 50% CPU. And back in 2009, this was a huge issue for us. It was just a huge issue, capacity planning, not just on circuits, but also on hardware itself, because there was lead time and it was expensive and everything that's involved with that. Well, I said immediately, I said, what is this? I remember, and they said, this is the cloud. This is cloud computing. This is Amazon. I was like, this is what I need to do. So within 6 months, I had left General Telecom, and I had a bunch of folks came with us. It was an amicable split, by the way. It wasn't, so we went ahead and started our own company. And the pillars of the company: we are never going to buy hardware, and we are never going to run a data center. I was done with getting calls overnight that something had broken, or getting calls, on vacation that somebody had spent $30,000 because they set off the fire suppression system. We were going to run a software company that sold to telcos because we knew where the bodies were buried and where the gaps were, but we were never going to own our own hardware. So that's what we did. And we started Icehook. Our first product was a product called Slinger, and it was CDR management. And this was in the days when folks were putting stuff on tapes or on storage area networks. It's really expensive, very clunky, and all the data was siloed. So you didn't, if you needed a record for CALIA, if you needed to run a report for based on how much state to state or interstate calling you were running, it was really difficult. And what I think made Slinger so good is that it took something that's pretty mundane, but that would take up devs and DBA's time, and gave it to the folks that actually needed the data. So when an attorney needed call records, he can go get the call records, or she could go get the call records. And so we built it on Amazon, although back then we were very hesitant. We sort of downplayed the Amazon relationship, because when you said Amazon in 2010, nobody, it had this sort of, if you spoke to a telco person in 2010 and you said, we're running our business on Amazon, they would think you were crazy, right? So we also did some stuff with Rackspace and Pure One, and we're like, oh, we're Rackspace, Pure One mostly, and then we do some stuff with Amazon as well. Well, we're doing like 95% of our business on Amazon and maybe 5% on these other companies. So fast forward, and I know I'm going a little long on this, but essentially, what we wanted to do with Icehook was software, bring sort of web-based software, Web 2.0 software to the telco industry, and do it in a way that we didn't have to own any of the infrastructure to actually deliver that service, even though we were selling SaaS. And it's in the beginning it was rough. I'll have to tell you. Selling somebody routing, which we eventually bought back from the General Telecom folks, licensed the whole thing back, name and everything. We wrote it, and sold it to the carrier community. It was a tough sell, saying, "Look, we're not going to put a box in your premise. We're gonna host it, and you're going to connect to us over the internet." And I mean, we lost a lot of business in the early days because we wouldn't put a server in somebody's location because it kind of blew up our model. We wanted to be small. We didn't want to have to deal with a lot of on-site issues. Back from running General Telecom, I knew that anytime you put a server in somebody's location, you were responsible for it, you're just asking for trouble. Somebody's going to come and change a network, change a firewall rule, or they're going to run an update on it and they're not going to tell you about it, and they're going to call you and say, why is it broken? So, that was my background. That's how we got to where we're at. And, so today we're really focused.
The shift to 100% pure virtual, then that was like going from, coming from a hardware basis and then making an early transition into this, entirely hardware agnostic or indifferent mode, which is pretty cool. And I bet I'm going to say it's not an uncommon experience. I'm guessing that other people have done it, but I think everybody goes through a different path, which is what makes the experience interesting. And everybody gets different stuff. To circle back just for a second, I must say I used your calling card products when I was traveling in the mid to late 90s. I used them a ton. Not always IDT, but sometimes IDT, but definitely have a lot of experience evolving that and trying to avoid those $3 a minute long distance calls. So what about Icehook? Icehook is now going on from that, yeah?
Yeah, well, so what we focus on today at Icehook, we have a number of different products, but I think what we want to, what we've been selling the most of, quite frankly, is call routing and call control. In the old days, 5 years ago, everybody was interested in least cost routing. That was the most important thing to anybody we spoke with. And this was, back when there was lots of companies that were, in the IXC days that were making a living buying from Peter and selling to Paul. And doing it on a pure arbitrage basis. So, and in general, Telecom, and we first started Icehook, these were a lot of our customers. And so we built a platform that would augment SBCs or any sort of SIP device and add enhanced routing to it. So you could have a single SBC, single open SIPs, or you can even have a free switch or an asterisk box or a meta switch, or you could have a whole network of them. And you could have a network of a bunch of different switches. So the very few networks we run into these days are homogeneous. They're usually company A bought company B, or they were buying a bunch of hardware that's now discontinued and now they've switched platforms. So you go into these networks and they're a mess. And they're trying to, like I said, originally just trying route and just being pure wholesale voice. Today, our customers are most times either ITSPs, so folks running, like Kazoo or some sort of asterisk or meta switch or a BroadSoft, either hosted or on-prem. Or we're dealing a lot with enhanced providers. So this is folks like a company in Chicago called Dialogue Tech that sells ads on the or post ads on the internet and have dynamic numbers that go to each ad. And so they're not exactly phone companies, but they're doing hundreds of millions of minutes a month, and they need to have they have large networks, and they need to be able to control where their calls are going, if they're having audio problems, how to quickly route around those. It's amazing how far the industry's come in just a few years, where a few years ago it was all cost. Now folks are taking a much more holistic approach to voice network management, where if customer X calls in to me, that's a problem to begin with. They shouldn't even be calling because they shouldn't have problems. But if they do have a problem, I can't say to them, we'll get back to you in 3 hours when we speak to our underlying network vendor and open a ticket with them, and hopefully they can solve the issue. What we empower our customers to do is to be able to say, okay, hold on, Mr. Customer, where are you having problems calling? Put them on hold for about 30 seconds, make the change to the destination, test it, and say, okay, try again. And even if they lose money, even if they're saying, look, I was routing it at a cent a minute, now I'm routing it at 5 cents a minute, and I'm only charging this customer 3 cents a minute, having a happier customer, having somebody that called in and said, you know what, these guys were on it. They took care of it. My boss was having a problem calling our largest supplier. Now he's not. It's a big deal. And so you take a holistic approach. You can't grow your business if you're losing customers out of the bottom and trying to plug holes. So if you can run a stable network and run a network that, oh, by the way, you are getting the best costs where possible. But if you're not, that's what enterprises are looking like today. They want the recurring revenue. They want the customers to stick around for for the long haul.
That's very interesting. The sensibilities you express align up exactly with what we do at ZipDX, and that is, it's not always about being the cheapest. In fact, customers who come to us and ask, if their first thing out of their mouth is what the rate is, then they're not going to be a happy customer with us, and so go it. But if you want to deliver a superlative end user experience and have happy, high value customers, then it's a whole different kind of infrastructure, and you need a whole different kind of partner to be able to do it. Because using your example, oftentimes we call our partners to inquire about something that happened, and you're talking to somebody that if they get back to you, you have maybe a 12 or 24-hour window before their logs roll off, and chances are you're not going to be able to determine anything about it anyway. So it's a specialty kind of thing, and it's very cool. And so that's an interesting kind of a customer that you have there.
Well, it's nice for us because they, look, we're very reasonably priced, but when we used to sell to folks that were doing wholesale, I mean, you're talking about customers of ours that are making fractions of a cent, and so they're super cost sensitive, and they're difficult customers to have because they need to send a tremendous amount of volume to make a modest amount of money, whereas customers that are much more quality focused are they send less volume, but they're making a heck of a lot more money per minute they send or per call they send through us. And I think I should just sort of back up and say, where do we sit in the network? How can we do all this? It's not magic, really. What Route Engine does is it sits, like I said, in between the edge device in a voice network and the vendor pool. So before a call ever goes out to the vendor pool, it comes to us first. And it gives us information like where the call came from, in terms of the A number, where the call is going to. We'll do a real-time LNP lookup. So we'll see, is this number ported? And then, based upon the business rules that are set in advance, we'll send back in real time, and this happens in, I don't know, with transit, maybe a tenth of a second, usually less, a list of routes that the switch is to try. So nothing else changes. So from our customer standpoint, billing, reporting, troubleshooting, network visibility, nothing changes for that customer. And for his vendors, if there's an audio problem, well, we're not involved in that. We're not adding an additional step in this. We're just saying we're what we call stateless. We're sending back the instructions, and then we're gone. We're ready to handle the next call. We log it. So, if you want to come back and say, well, why did we go X, Y, or Z? Well, great, we have that. But we're the ones just executing the instructions and the business rules. And because we're standards based and because we're hosted with Amazon, and we're really all over the world, we can interface. You can have a single pane of glass view at your routing. If you're a global enterprise, you can control all your routing from one source and not have to go into. I had one customer that came to me, and they were running pretty successful. They're running Asterisk, and then they have an Asterisk gateway as well. They have about 50 of them. And so I said, as I typically do, okay, what are you doing today? Right? Well, if you need to make a change, what are you doing today? Oh, well, we've got a script. It's a great script, and it goes in to these gateways and changes the routing on each and every one of them. Well, how long does that take? Well, it takes about 12 hours to go through the whole routine. And oh, by the way, that's saying nothing to, I'm going into a gateway that should be really focused on something else and starting to mess with config files and mess with the overall setup. which you never want to do. Like what's nice about our product is our customer, the way we set it up with them, they can completely go in and ham the whole thing up, and their calls are still going to work. They can go in and literally break things, and we'll set it up with them where if we don't respond properly or they don't get a response from us, they can go ahead and hit a default route, as opposed to if they make a mistake in a config file or in a PSX or something like that on a Sonos, you're down, you're out. And you guys know, I mean, that's where outages happen, right? The whole myth of the fiber cut is no such thing. It's somebody that goes into a router and they break something. They change a config file, and it takes a long time to fix that. And that's how outages happen. And so we are very low touch in sort of the network. I mean, we can get very granular. I can route one phone number individually, or I can block one phone number individually, or I can route a whole country. But I'm not going to go in and start forklifting out a bunch of stuff and changing the way your people work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I've got a couple of questions now, Randy.
Yes,
please.
It's clear that you said that you don't touch the media, you just handle the signaling. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so you're running a cloud-based. Well, you mentioned OpenSIPs. I'm guessing OpenSIPs with some kind of database backend, probably Redis, knowing OpenSIPs.
Well, go ahead. Let me finish your question.
So, so what you're doing is you're running a very well-managed OpenSIPs core for people who handle media on the front end, and sitting between those user equipments and the SIP trunks that go off to terminate calls. I guess that's what you're doing, isn't it?
Actually, it's not what we're doing.
Okay.
We do have OpenSIPs in our network, but we do that for load balancing strictly. And we actually, when we started, we didn't use OpenSIPs at all. We expected people to be able to use fully qualified domain names, which, as it turns out, a lot of switches, voice switches, can't. So we put the OpenSIP so we can give folks IP addresses, and we could distribute the calls to our network on the back end. And our architecture is thus. We actually wrote the SIP stack, and it's really a sort of a partial stack. We're not, we only have a few call states. That's all written in Ruby. We use MongoDB. We do use Redis as well for some caching and storing of that. But we use MongoDB as well. And the reason we use Mongo, as I told you, we built this for Amazon Web Services. And what's really nice about databases like Mongo is I can horizontally scale them across infrastructure. So as I'm not going to get a table with 500 million rates in it. It's just, as like a relational database would be. And then once that gets too big, I've got to pull out my servers and put in bigger servers and maybe start sharding off of that. What we do is as we expand, we just add more nodes. And so Mongo handles that beautifully. And it also handles service interruption and things like that. So if I'm running a customer and the Eastern Seaboard falls off the United States, and I'm just left with, and I lose, let's say, a third of my network, things are still going to run because it's distributed in nature. It's sort of loosely coupled elements that are all working together. Getting back to another reason we don't use OpenSIPs is because we do things like we do things like real-time LATA OCN, and we just have a lot more capabilities in terms of keying off of different things in the message. So we're not locked into what OpenSIPs gives us. We have the ability to pick off different headers in the message, so we can do things like easily handle different tags irrespective of where they are in the message, and we can develop very, very quickly. Whereas if we ran off of OpenSIPs, then we're kind of reliant on what they give us, and we really.
It's really interesting. I would have said it kind of works the other way. I don't know what you're using, but I would have said probably OpenSIPs is probably one of the easiest and quickest platforms to actually develop new and interesting requirements upon.
It is, but the scripting is a bit funky. And then you get into a whole issue where we have a front end GUI, which I'm, James, if you.
We want to see your front end.
Front end.
What I'm really interested in is what is your magic sauce, Randy? What is it that you add to the equation that makes all of your customers want to be your customer forever? What do you do that that is valued?
Well, first of all, I just want to, all of our customers are, well, let's say the lion's share are on month-to-month agreements. And there's been this way from the beginning. We've always, like I said, we wanted sort of an internet model and a SaaS model that we have to earn our check every month. And so why do they work with us? Well, we make their network just work better. Again, if we want to go back to OpenSIPs, I mean, you can, to run a network of different OpenSIPs that are different versions all around the world and trying to coordinate routing on them, it's not easy. I mean, even things like, okay, I have five vendors that I want to do business with, and vendor A wants all his calls in E164, and vendor B wants just 10 digits for US and 011 for all international calls. Things like that, while really, really simple in an OpenSIPs world, get kind of kludgy, because you've got to go and modify config files and start getting into areas that you don't necessarily want non-experts touching. So we take something that's very, very complex, routing, and make it very easy. The other thing that keeps people with us is when you think about what routing is, it's much less network stuff. That's why I say our SIP stack is really small. It's really things like rate management. You just start to run through the numbers. Let's say like I said, you deal with 5 vendors and you want to terminate just US traffic. You don't even care about the rest of the world. Forget about the rest of the world for just a minute, because, and we'll circle back to it, trust me. Just to handle US domestic traffic, you need to consider at the minimum about 180,000 different dial codes. And not just the B number, but you have to consider the A number. So you need to say, where's the call coming from? Where is the call going to? We have different, what we call jurisdictions. So interstate calls are rated different than intrastate. Inter are different than intra. And then if the call originated overseas, that has a different rate. And then if the call goes down the block, well, that has a different rate. So you have 4 jurisdictions that you have to deal with about a minimum, like I said, of about 180,000. So you're looking at roughly 720,000 different permutations for one vendor, and then multiply that by 5, and then try and keep up with that every month as you get new rates. And oh, by the way, you also have to look at things like local number portability. And you are also assuming that all your vendors are going to normalize their rates, which they almost never do. I mean, you'll get one vendor that says, all right, these codes are going to go for the US 6 digits deep. And then your other vendor is going to say, no, well, we're going to go 7 digits deep, which means you have to go with the highest common denominator. So instead of only doing 180,000 times 3, you're looking at about 650,000.
Okay. I'm getting the message here, Randy. What you're saying is your customers are people who really don't have the time or the resource to deal with that level of complexity. So they just want to throw all that hassle at somebody else, and that somebody else is you.
Well, it's our software. They do it. It's all self-serve. So you could take somebody with minimal training and have them build one, and you hear the number.
You know,
right?
What? This is a really good lead-in to having a look at your marvelous front end, because it must be a work of art if you can simplify all of the stuff that you've just been talking about to a level that that somebody who's relatively untrained can actually access it, make it work.
We like to say if you could use a mouse, you can handle routing on our system, and so yeah, I'm happy to share my screen and be brave, James.
Go on, be brave.
Okay,
it's interesting listening to your intro. Way back in 2005, when we kicked off TruePhone, we started in exactly the same way. We said that we weren't going to own any machines, any platforms. But unfortunately, as we grew, we ended up with professionals who came in and decided that they wanted to own and operate their own platforms, and so the hosted model went out of the window.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's certain institutions that they just can't do it, financial institutions, for example. But for the most part, if everybody, I mean, I trust my vendors to manage their data center because that's all they're doing. And customers just they want to touch it. A lot of them. A lot of folks still just want to touch a box and kick it when it's there, and they feel like they have more control. And they really, I don't know. It's gotten much easier. Let's put it that way.
If they really feel that, then ask them to go pull the AC cord out of the back of it and see what happens.
Well, what's interesting is the whole psychology of it. When we used to sell software, and this was back in my previous life, we'd sell software, we'd put it on site, and they would say, okay, we're going to have an outage at 5 when everybody leaves the office or what have you. We're going to have a maintenance window, and we're going to shut all this stuff down, and whatever, do an upgrade or do something, right? And they're fine with that. But if you as a hosted, you can't do that as a hosted service. You can't shut things down. Like, it's got to be up all the time. That, like I said, we're month to month, so we can't go down. And I think it's ironic that folks are so much more tolerant of outages in their own network than they would be of anybody else's.
Anyway, let's have a look at your front end.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right.
Nice and clear. That's very clear, in fact.
Okay.
Password 123.
So I'm not going to get down too deep into the weeds here, but we've broken this up and tried to make it as easy and as clean as possible. So we really just break things up between, and we're just going to focus on these 4 areas here. Carriers. When carriers are defined as sort of an entity that you work with, and that could be.
And I love your dummy data names. I think they're really useful.
well, yeah. So you get a sense of these carriers can have inbound or outbound, what we call endpoint groups. In the old days, we would call these trunk groups. They're just like bundles of traffic. And so you might be buying, two products from or more products from a vendor like Quest over here. If I go ahead and I want to add another vendor, like I said, this is pretty straightforward. So I just give it a name. I'm just going to leave.
I'm surprised you didn't put in SomWid or something like that.
You know what? As I was typing this, I thought I probably should have had another name ready to go. And because this is going to be a vendor, I'm going to make him outbound. So we'll just call him vendor, X LD. Okay, and then going to skip a lot of the more sort of down technical things, but we built it. If you see the regular expressions here, we built this so you can basically build whatever you want, right? So if the vendor, as I spoke of earlier, wants E164, well, I can just put a plus here, and now all calls that go out to this vendor will have the plus in front of it. Or I can strip things off with this dial code matcher here. And if you're not familiar with this, of course we're here to help, but we have some of the most common regular expressions here. So I'm going to go ahead and create this vendor. I could essentially what we would do here is we would add IP addresses. So and this could also be, depending on your SBC, it could be an Acme SBC. You can just signal back to not an IP address, but an SAG or a group that would that's all pre-built on the SBC. But I can add as many of these as I want, and then I can set an order on these as well. So what will happen is you'll have a vendor like a level V, and they'll give you 10 IP addresses to send. But you don't want to do that on every call, so you can load all 10 in here, and then you can say, all right, only send to one of these, right? So only one of those two. So I go ahead and I've created my carrier, right? And so it's here, and I can now add rates to this if I want. But before I get up to rates, I just want to go over codes really quickly, because again, this speaks to the complexity that we're dealing with here. In a place like the US, you don't just have a dial code. It does matter which state it's in. So like I said, a call from Queens to Brooklyn is going to cost differently than a call from Los Angeles to that same number in Brooklyn. It could be calling the same B number, but because one is interstate and one is intrastate, you're going to have different rates from your vendors. The other thing that we have here is LATA OCN. And this, for those of you not familiar, is based on the old Bell system. And essentially, the LATA tells me a location, and the OCN tells me who owns that number. And so what certain vendors will do is they won't give you rates by dial code. They'll give you rates by LATA OCN, which is all well and good. But because the US numbering plan changes more or less monthly, if you convert LATA OCN to dial code in advance, every time the LERG changes, which is monthly, you're going to have to update all your rates and, in a sense, update all your routing. What we will do is on the fly, when the call comes in, we look at this number, and we say, okay, LATA OCN, and we grab that information. Again, this is all done on the fly. To get these codes in here, as you can see, if I go back, I mean, we have about 400,000 codes in here, 400,000 unique codes. It's not something that's easily done in a lot of platforms.
Okay, can I just test and see how good your thing is by putting in one of my dial codes, see whether it comes.
Oh yeah, I mean this is customer driven, but you can certainly give me a dial code. What might work better is if I do in the route table, but go ahead.
So country code 44.
I think we have it like this.
And then 79788. 79788.
Yeah, that's a little deep. Let's go give it a wild card and see what we get. Okay, 797. Oh, I guess maybe I should go a little deeper.
Just no 8.
No 8s. It must be
we're missing.
You're missing, but the nice thing is that you're not missing, because this will still work. What I said earlier was that you have vendors that will some give you more codes, some will give you less codes. This will do an apples to orange comparison, and I'll show you how that works.
So you still route that. You still route that call.
Yes, absolutely, and it will roll up. So some people just have country code 44, and they may have a flat rate for that. Some will have 79788 in there as well, and I'll show you in the routing table how that works, because I have an example of a roll up.
Right. Okay.
So now we have our codes. I'm going to move over to rates, and again, this is just one vendor. Okay, one outbound vendor, of which I have a number of here, and I have he's got 500,000 rates. What's also interesting to see here is, so the rates have, as I mentioned earlier, different jurisdictions. So in the US, intrastate, interstate. If this was an international location or outside the US, I shouldn't say international for the folks on this call, but if this is outside the US, then it wouldn't have a jurisdiction necessarily. It would be undefined. And then we have user definable jurisdictions as well, like local. But we have effective dates and ineffective dates. So again, the way this works in practice is you'll have all these vendors that you're working with. They're going to send you different rate updates, either partial or full complete rate updates. They're going to come in on Monday, but they're going to be effective on Saturday. Some's going to be effective in 30 days from now. And so this is all sort of managing large files and things that you sometimes can't even open on a regular sort of desktop application. So to even just go through and analyze them, much less create some sort of a routing algorithm based on it, is very, very difficult. So we can set dates to be effective at a specific time and a specific date in the future, and then we can also set it to become ineffective as well. So at the prescribed time, the new rate will take effect, and it just happens, and that will flow through to routing if you're doing something like a least cost algorithm. And so again, rates are just simply uploaded. Let's see if we can find some, just by a simple sort of rate sheet update. And so it would come in, and rate sheets come in all different shapes and sizes. There's no standardization in the industry for that, which is crazy. But our system is built to handle essentially any format. You just sort of want to set the top row to match what we're looking for, and you can have superfluous rows. You can have additional data that we don't need, but we'll just key on what's here. So once you've built your carriers and your codes and your rates, now you're ready to really implement routing. And
so a quick question, who does that rate building? Do you do it for the customer, or no, does the customer do it themselves?
The customer does it themselves. Okay. And if I wanted to, let's say, do a new rate sheet, this is what's really brave. I'm going to go onto my local hard drive and see if I can find a rate sheet. So I'm going to make this effective. Let's just make it effective at midnight tonight. Okay, so I'm going to choose a file, and let's see if I have demo rates somewhere, which I should. Where are my demo rates? No demo rates? I'll tell you what, I am going to, let me go, I'll just grab a different rate sheet. Hold on. I'm going to go back here and just, I'm going to reuse one. You'll have to forgive me for that. Okay, I'm going to take this one's a nice big one, 500,000. So I'm just going to download this. Okay. And so it's 8.5 megs. And again, I mean, these are the types of things that on sort of a typical computer, yeah, it's not that you couldn't open it, you couldn't deal, but they're kind of pains to deal with large files like this. So right now, this is processing, and all this stuff happens in the background. So I'm not stuck here. I can go somewhere else. I can move around. But eventually, I'm gonna come back here, and I might have several sheets to load, so I can go ahead and do that. But we're gonna get back to this one because she's processing, and I'll show you what happens actually once it's done. So I'm going to go ahead and just move over to a route table. And what a route table is, is just a group of characteristics. What makes our system a bit unique from some, what you sort of referred to as well, well, maybe you could put it in the OpenSIPs, is they're all building static tables. So somewhere in a database, there is a large table with all these rates and all these routes and a whole matrix that's built. Well, that's all well and good, but the problem is then your Lada OCN routing becomes doesn't really work. It comes fixed in time. If you want to change some of the characteristics, like instead of setting a margin, which I sort of blew past in the beginning, but you can set individual margin percentages on your customers of how much money you want to make. If you want to change that, well, that blows up the table as well. Not to mention when new rates come in, as they do at least monthly for each of your vendors. So this just says who is involved, who do we want to send the calls to, what routing algorithm do we use, we'll do lowest price for this, and how many routes do I want to send. We have certain customers that have 40 vendors that they work with, but obviously they're not going to attempt 40 different customers, so they may limit it to 5 or 7 or something like that. Okay, let's go back to our rate sheets here and see. Okay, so our vendor X sheet is processed. I'm going to go look through here, and this looks good. I don't have any errors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to import this. Okay, so now it is going, and we'll get back. You see it's already started here. We're going to get back to our route table here. So what we're going to do is now we have this route table. It's route table 1, and I want to see, well, what happens when a customer calls a specific number. Well, a couple things, right? So we got all the routes that come up. I've got all my different jurisdictions, and like I said, this is something that you can do if a customer's on the phone. Mr. Customer, what number are you trying to call? Well, you know, they're trying to call this number here. And I can see that, you know, first in route choice is Quest. Then I have Paytech here, Quest Gold, which is a little more expensive. And then this company Horizon. Well, I can see that they're having problems. So what I'm going to do, instead of sending the call to Quest, well, I'm just going to take them and drag them and move them out of route. And that's it. Next call that comes in, the route order is now changed from Quest, Paytech, Quest, and Horizon to Paytech, Quest, Horizon, and then regular Quest.
What have you got in the way of diagnostics and a management interface showing the traffic that's flowing through? So, because normally you can spot the routes or routes that are failing just by monitoring the signaling. You can see they.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. But remember, we're not in the call flow at that point.
No, but you're in the signaling, and you see everything that goes on because you see the signaling.
No, I don't. I send a redirect back, and then I'm done. So I don't see what after I send the redirect back, the customer then sends from his, let's say, SBC, goes out to vendor A. If it doesn't work at vendor B, it will go to vendor B or vendor C or vendor D. Remember, we're not involved at that part of the call. Now, what I do see, I do have SIP signaling between myself and the customer that, of course, we can see. And we can see, okay, these are the routes that went back. We also have very comprehensive call logs that tell us not just the phone numbers or anything. We actually go through what price did we see it at, what we saw the jurisdiction for, whether it was a ported number. We have all that information in terms of call logs, and so we get that to the customer as well, and so they can do some diagnostics there. But typically in this situation, we're sending back the routes, and the customer is saying, "Hey, it's not working." And they're seeing that either on their signaling or from their call records, because we don't know. I don't know if I send back, if Quest is in first place, I don't know that the call actually completed on Quest or not, right? So I think what we do here is during the call setup, and then we're out. But does that answer your question, by the way?
Yeah. So you've got no live monitoring. Somebody else has to worry about that.
Well, again, of the call, we have live monitoring of the customer's equipment to us and back. But after that, we are purposely out of the call. We do not want to be in that call flow. So here's our route table, and again we've now updated it. Some other things we can do as well are go ahead and block calls and block them for I won't do it here, but I can block a vendor as well for a period of time, and I can say, okay, you know, put them in the penalty box for 24 hours, right? And then they're blocked. I'm going to go ahead and just clear that, by the way, right now, because what I want to do is get back to your original question. So you said, hey, let's how easy is it for me to operate the system? Well, we added a new vendor, right? And so we want to put this vendor into our routing matrix. And maybe what we want to do is we want to get that Quest out of there, right? That Quest we didn't like those guys because they were failing. So they're out, and I'm going to replace them with my new vendor XLD. Okay, it's ready to go. So we'll go back to our same phone number. And now you should see, well, there's vendor X, right? Because they had we're doing least cost route, and they had the least cost, they're now in first place. Again, as soon as we uploaded the rates, that happened. We didn't have to do anything else. We didn't have to go into the switches and change the routing table. I didn't have to rebuild this routing table. I just had to add them to it. And if I had left Quest in there, you know, they would still be in there as well. So just in terms of the simplicity, I mean, I just took 8 megs, an 8 meg text file with about 500,000 rates and added it into this pretty complex system, and it's you know, now going to be taking calls and doing it in the order that I had set up in advance. The other thing is that not all of these are, I'm going to hopefully find this, not all of these rates are the same length. So, for example, of course I don't have it in here. Hopefully this one has it. Ah, rats. Well, if I had one that was, let's say, MPA only, just 212, it would it would show up here in the routing matrix. Oh, maybe it is that. Okay, yeah. So there's the Quest Gold. It's just a dial code 2, which is in there as well. So, getting back to your original. You know, why my phone number is not in there. It doesn't really have to be because we've got it covered with the fact that we could have different length codes and different length rates. It all rolls up. It considers the whole number and then recursively looks at it and compares it to the rates that are there and uses the most discrete rate to match.
Okay.
I have a question about the rates in general, and that is that these rates that we're looking at here. Just to clear something up in my head, are these per minute rates? Are they per second? Are they per 6 second? What are they?
It depends. It depends on your vendor. Typically, vendors. I say there are no standards, but typically the rates are given out per minute. Now, some destinations will have different minimums and things like that, but for the most part, the rates are given out on a per minute basis.
Okay, so if you have some rates which are not per minute, do you convert them to per minute to put them in the system so everything's the same?
Yeah, you could also the system allows you to put in a minimum billing increment as well, so it can compare certain things here. So I've got minimum duration and billing increment, but typically, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen folks, certainly never shorter. Sometimes there's longer. Sometimes they say, hey, minimum is 3 minutes, but here's the price per minute.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so like a lot of folks, they're going to go ahead and do this, and they want to just do it to save money, right? I want to save money. Okay, that's great. You can save money. But really, as I spoke about in the beginning, the real power to this is the ability to service customers, to be able to go ahead and really granularly make routing changes on the fly in real time. One thing I didn't show you is that this web interface, and this gets back to why we wrote it the way we wrote it. So the web interface and the actual system use the same code. So what you're seeing right now, when a call comes in SIP, we convert it to an HTTP request and do our lookups and then send it back HTTP, and then we convert it back into SIP to speak to a switch. What's nice about that is that what you see here is there's no difference between what you see on the screen and what's going on when you actually send the call through. And that's really, really important, because a lot of systems, they can't, if you had, let's say, OpenSIPs in the back end and some other web front end that's using a different type of algorithm, you'd have to keep those completely in sync, or else you could be prone to errors. What it's also good for is that, in this web interface, it's all API driven as well. So I just put a little dot, I don't know if you can see that JSON behind here, and now I've got that whole page in JSON. So the customers that are so inclined, instead of having somebody upload the rates, can go ahead and send that through a REST API. So they can go ahead and, let's say, create rate sheets just like we did, and then upload it into the system. So you can, like I said, integrate this into what you're already doing today. If you have a billing system that is something that you're really married to, or an OSS or BSS system, that's fine. We don't want to replace any of that. What we want to do is take what you're developing in there, or the rates that you have in there, or the business rules that you have in there. Maybe customer X can only send all his calls to AT&T. Well, that's fine. We can make that happen here, and we can make it happen in real time through the API.
Randy, now that I have audio, I see that Corrado has one question before we close, and we need to close up because we've been going an hour, and that's a good time. Corrado, your question.
Can you hear me?
Beautifully,
yeah.
Beautifully.
Okay, fantastic. I'm not in my usual location. I'm home because I've been in and out of many different things today. The question is, maybe because I wasn't present from the start, where does your system, where it sits in a complete SIP architecture, where does it connect into the big picture?
I should pull up a diagram here, but just to tell you really quickly, it connects, we sit just outside the edge SIP device. It's typically an SBC, but doesn't have to be. And so we are, when the call, prior to the call going out to the network vendor, it comes to us first. And we do a real-time lookup and send back instructions to the switch in the form of a multiple choice SIP 300 redirect message that then the switch will then act on and go directly out to the vendors, no longer through us.
Okay, so it's probably a bit difficult to integrate directly with simple PBXs, a PBX. So creating a trunk that interrogates your systems and then you redirect the call. It's not something that is so easy to integrate. It's something that is probably sitting at a level of let me say a carrier switch.
What type of PBX are we talking about here?
Any PBX that can use a SIP trunk for outbound calls is pointing directly to the server without authentication, going out to an IP address that is pre-authenticated, for example. but
Right.
how does that work? Where you can plug in, where do you hook in this kind of infrastructure?
So it's a good question. I mean, it's really going to depend on can the PBX get to the internet? If it can, then they can signal to us. Now, most PBXs that we've worked with are RFC compliant, so they will handle a redirect. And in fact, that's how Find Me, Follow Me works. So most of them do speak that. The other thing that we do, because we work with a lot of networks that, like I said, are homogenous, we work with a lot of homegrown platforms as well as a lot of the the big guys, and their signaling requirements are very different. So a Sonos SIP redirect is going to look very different from, let's say, an Oracle redirect. It's just the SIP standards is a bit of an oxymoron, as if you've worked with it, you understand. You can customize right here in our contact template what the SIP messaging looks like. So if it's a PBX, and let's say we have to add a trunk context or something like that, I can add that here. I can also have variables that are different fields on the outbound side that will pull it from whichever vendor it comes in on. So I can really custom design the messaging on a per connection basis. And again, it's not really a connection because it's SIP, but I can customize the messaging. And the trick with a lot of PBXs is, especially some of the older ones, their SIP messaging is really funky. So if they do have the capability of responding to a redirect, then we can work with them. And I know, obviously Asterisk and FreeSwitch, they work no problem. We work with those types of platforms every day.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Randy.
Anybody else have any questions?
Sure.
Two Randys. Yeah, we're spoiled today, right? Or you guys are anyway. I'm Randy. He's Randy. Randy, you want to put your camera back on for a moment?
Absolutely.
And we should just make sure that we have all the contacts that are necessary. That's me twice.
I have to say, Randy Jr., how pleasant it is to have such an eloquent speaker, and to have a speaker who has less hair than me.
Well, that's
all right. There we go. There he is. Okay.
Well, thank you so much, by the way, for the time. And I apologize to the listeners, like my wife, who says I get a little bit too geeky when I talk about this stuff. But I mean, it's weird to say that I love this.
That certainly was not geeky.
No, it's not a problem. It is not a problem.
That was very much into the business drivers, which and nothing that you said in your intro. I don't think anybody could argue anything against that. So that was really good. Very polished performance.
We just wanted to make sure that before we close out this session, at least this segment, I have a couple of things I would like to say after that have nothing to do with you guys, Randy. But do we have all your contacts? And should the website would be, I assume, icehook.com, HTTPS website. Icehook.com. I, in error, said Ice Host, and I'm very sorry when I was because I was all flustered because I didn't have audio before. Anyway, icehook.com. Are there specific things or people that you're looking for to contact you?
We work with a pretty broad range, but I think what has been, there's really two segments that we've seen a lot of recently. And like I said earlier, sort of the ITSPs, the folks that are running a hosted PBX company, and maybe they thought they're not really big enough for this type of an application because they don't need multiple vendors, or they don't, or they don't do enough minutes. I think that's a little, they should speak to us, because I think being single threaded on any vendor on anything is a mistake. But B, because we're hosted, we can make it work for a lot of folks. And the other guys are the ones that are doing sort of non-traditional voice. They're not necessarily a phone company, but what they do does involve voice services. So web companies that do pass voice, we're seeing more and more of those as well.
Okay, very cool. Well, I appreciate that you contacted us, Randy, and we will be in touch, of course. And any new things that come up, don't be afraid to ping us. We're going to move on. You're welcome to stay, by the way, of course. I need to run, but I wanted to mention a couple of things before we seal off the session. And one of them was that, as the guys, the core team at VUC knows, I've been testing mobile carriers because I just moved. And my current carrier, I am on the ground floor, and I do not have a consistent voice, let alone data. Now I've got a Wi-Fi access point right behind me. It's very strong with a gigabit internet connection. So, I don't really need data down here in my office, but my phone doesn't always ring. So we're in and out of that. And so I need to change operators. And I have installed an app. This is Android, by the way. Sorry, I don't know what the equivalent is for iOS, but this is Network Cell Info. It's a free program. It's called Lite, which is the free version. I've already paid for the get rid of the ads. I can see that it's not quite in focus, but sooner or later, come on. Oh, well, let's try another. I have 3 phones, so there we go.
And if you want to see what the professional version looks like.
You have the professional version? All right,
well,
let's try this one.
Versions.
I didn't get the professional because I'm not even sure I'd understand. You basically can see enough to figure it out. It's free, so download it. If you're on Android, Network Cell Info, look for it. Oh, let's see, James, let me see. So you're not too much better in focus than I am, but LTE. Anyway.
It's a very, very useful tool.
Let's talk about, James, because you're more conversant than I am. What I did is so you're testing these services, and I left my you can have your Wi-Fi on, so you're not sucking data to test them like you would be normally. So you can test, you've got to gauge, there's just, we're not going to go into this in any depth because there's like 1,000 things you can do, but the main point
is effectively it's signal strength, even though for 3G and 4G, it's not signal strength. I mean, that confuses people. But it's all to do with, if you look at your scale, you can see you've got green, yellow, orange, and then red.
And how accurate do you think that is, James? Because it seems to be pretty good.
Well, yeah, that's to be within a dB or 2.
No, I meant, I meant accurate on their estimation, their appreciation of green, yellow. I mean, as far as I can tell,
no, that's pretty good.
That's actually good. That's their judgment, really. You can see that I'm in
spot on.
You can see that. What is this? This is LT. This is SFR. So we're kind of in the yellow, which is, yeah, it's not great, but you know what? It hasn't moved. And all right, let me put this one on. Corrado's got his. He is in yellow as well, Corrado, on Virgin.
I'm in yellow too. We're all in yellow.
We're all in yellow. Point is, you don't want to be in orange or red. And here's the problem that I have. I'm on Edge in free. Look, Edge.
Oh, no.
When's the last time you remember being on Edge, folks?
Well, you don't do Edge because it's totally useless.
It is totally useless. But what I care about, and the guys, we've been talking about this and they know this, but I'm just telling the general public, my problem is that my cell will not, sometimes it's like offline and won't receive calls. So it's the voice, ironically, it's the voice that matters for me. And the voice, people are sent to voicemail. Battery is low. Yeah, because I've been testing everything. I have 3 phones on, and they're all on. They're all on.
You can't use voice over Wi-Fi?
Oh, well, that's an excellent. No, yeah. Here's the problem with that. So if I was going to use it, it would have to be on Orange, which is my ISP now, and I've got an incredible 920 megabits down. So almost gigabit internet. But if you're not on Orange, you can't use it. Well, Orange's signal here is not good.
To be precise, what you need in order to use 3GPP IWLAN, i.e. Wi-Fi calling, you need two things. One is a handset that is capable of doing it. And secondly, an operator profile, which then lives up and provisions that service.
Right.
And if you have one or the other, then it won't work. You've got to have both.
Right. And we know, James, if I may, we know that my phone will do this on T-Mobile. And for some reason, I don't know whether it does or does not do it on Orange, and Orange is my ISP now. But the problem is Orange's coverage is actually not good. SFR happens to be better in the neighborhood I'm in. And I want to, take this away from me or you or whatever to say that this is your problem with coverage for any one of us, which is someone asks you, well, are you happy with T-Mobile? Are you happy with Verizon, whatever, in the States? Well, you can't, your answer is meaningless because where are you? Where do you live? Where do you work? And where do you go? So this is why I recommend getting this free app, Network Cell Info Lite. And if you want to get rid of the ads, it's like $1.50 or something. The point is, you can walk around between these places where you live, where you work, and where you hang out, and you'll see exactly what the story is. Am I right, James?
You are right.
Okay, so that's it.
Sorry, Randy, if I can interject very quickly. There's another function in that software that you can see probably if you focus on my screen. That is also giving you a map exactly of where you are and where is the cell tower that is broadcasting the signal for you.
Well,
so you can
where
see
it thinks it is, which is
that's a touchy issue in that it's a fuzzy thing, in that they are getting that from Mozilla's database, as they say. So I
can tell you that this is accurate. It's 100% accurate. I know that the cell is where they say.
Corrado,
I have to.
I can show you mine.
Corrado, you have a river.
Inaccurate.
Corrado, you have a river. Look at this. You have a river, and
yes.
I have a river. Look at that.
I can tell you that in my case, they're accurate. They're exactly pinning where the tower is.
Really?
It's not right with mine either, I'm afraid.
Well, it's not 100% guaranteed. Randy, do you have any comments? We're going to close out pretty soon. So any comments on any of this?
I really have to leave instead because I have a wine tasting in 15 minutes that is waiting for me.
Go for it, Corrado.
Love you and leave you, guys. Thank you.
Okay, Corrado. Take care. See you next week.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Randy, any comments on this before we close out?
I've got a story with Verizon and a network extender, but it'll cause me to swear. So I'd probably rather not go through it. But long story short, I lived in an apartment that in the middle of Brooklyn, and I couldn't get cell phone coverage.
Yeah, what a surprise! And I bet all of the mobile networks in Brooklyn claim 100% coverage everywhere.
You've seen the maps. So I bought a $250 network extender, and it by the way, it was only, I think it was only a 3G. It was anyway. It worked, but it was over, of course, my internet connection. It worked, and then it broke, and I spent, I don't know, hours trying to fix it with them. Finally, they said, "Well, we'll sell you another one." I said, "I'm not buying another one. You're going to fix it or fix."
Hey.
Long story short, I moved to Project Fi here in the States. I've got voice over Wi-Fi. Just got the new Pixel. I've never looked back. So it's voice over Wi-Fi.
You've actually got a Pixel 2 with the eSIM. So have you configured it using the eSIM without putting a SIM card in it?
Yes. It reminded me back of CDMA, right? No SIM for that, but you can put a SIM in here. There's actually there's a slot for it. I just don't need to do it on Fi. But if I wanted to switch providers, I can put a SIM.
So
that's an absolutely perfect use for Fi because they use how many different operators? 2 or 3. They use Sprint and T-Mobile or whatever.
Yeah, in my neck of the woods, I think they also cut a deal with somebody else whose name is escaping me right now for the Midwest. But yeah, they can do multiple networks, of course, if Sprint and T-Mobile merge, then I'm back to one network.
That's a good point, and that's one reason why they probably should not. Anyway,
just for balance, it's worth mentioning that Apple do this as well, but they, for whatever reason, they failed to put an eSIM in the new iPhone 10, and so Google have got one big one up over Apple there, because we know that Apple have got all the bits and pieces to do that. And you can buy an iPad Pro like the one I've got here, talking to you on right now. And yeah, eSIM with multiple countries. But did they put it in the iPhone 10? No. The reason for that being they're still slightly worried about the VoLTE roaming, the voice profile. But that's something that we fixed for them about 3.5 years ago. So they have all the bits and pieces they need to do that.
You know what's going to be really funny is in 5 years to look back on this discussion, don't you think? I mean, you know, this is all going to be resolved just like so many other things have been. But
anyway, what you need, Randy, is your own radio access little box, something like about the same size as a wireless access point, but one that operates in multi-operator neutral host mode.
I'm looking forward to receiving the one from you, James, as a prototype.
And I can't think where you might get that back-end service from.
Well, we could certainly work out a sponsorship deal, James. Just ping me. All right, anyway, we're going to go on to next week. Gosh, we're 21 minutes over.
Oh, we're over.
No, well, the satellite isn't that expensive, right? So, all kidding aside, thanks, Randy, and thanks for hanging out with us afterwards. Keep in touch.
Thanks for having me. Yes, we'll definitely be in touch, and thanks for having me, and good luck with your mobile phone coverage.
Oh my God! Well,
before you go, Randy, I have one question for you. Your headset, it's a Sennheiser. Which model is it?
Oh, you're asking me like I know offhand. I can look at it.
Just turn towards me. Turn 90.
Right?
Okay, yeah, I know which one. I was looking it up. No, it sounds great, and
it does sound great.
I'm always on the lookout for headsets that I haven't tried, because I'm always recommending them to ZipDX customers in peculiar applications.
I'll give you my a little tight, but it works great. It's definitely doesn't look as nice as any of yours, though.
You know what, though? Well, we've had hit or miss, and there are a lot of people, like James has got those little Apple things in there. Yeah.
They work.
They work, but then you're going to lose them, and the batteries are going to die on them, and they're awfully expensive. For what
all right, wait a minute.
You're exactly that, but
you're holding it wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
Next.
This is secret. Anyway, come on, cut the live feed. Let's go proceed.
Cut the live feed. Let's go to the adult only. Thanks everybody for joining us. We really appreciate it, and gosh, I just hope I can choose a mobile provider. What do you think? Help me out. Later, next week.